I died on a Tuesday. Well, not me, strictly speaking. My heart was still beating a steady 60 beats per minute, a nurse's rhythm, reliable and unexciting. My lungs were still filling with the stale, recycled air of my heating system, which I kept set strictly to 64 degrees to save on natural gas. But my future? The version of Martha Evans who lived comfortably until 90, who took that trip to the Amalfi Coast, who died with dignity in a private room rather than a state-funded ward? She died at exactly 3:14 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Akron. The only light came from the harsh, actinic blue glow of my Dell laptop, cutting through the suburban darkness. The silence at this hour is heavy. It presses against the windows like water against a submarine. You can hear the house settling. You can hear the refrigerator hum. You can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. I wasn't sleeping. I was doing math. On the screen in front of me was a spreadsheet. I'm good with Excel. Frank taught me before he passed. "Numbers don't lie, Marty," he used to say, tapping the screen with a calloused finger. "People lie, emotions lie, but the math is the only God you can trust." I had input everything. My pension from 40 years at Akron General, my Social Security, the life insurance payout from Frank, the projected inflation rate of 3.5%, my estimated medical costs based on a family history of hypertension, and then I input the variable, the miscellaneous outflows. I hit enter, the cell turned red. I took off my reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling the permanent indentation there. I put the glasses back on. I typed the formula again, praying I had misplaced a decimal. I hadn't. According to the cold, impartial logic of the spreadsheet, on Tuesday, October 14th, 2027, I would buy my last loaf of bread. I stared at the date. October 14th, 2027. I would be 68 years old. After that date, the red line on the graph plummeted straight down into the abyss. Destitution, bankruptcy, relying on the state. I looked around my kitchen. It was spotless. The counters were wiped down. A stack of coupons for the grocery store sat under a magnet on the fridge. 50 cents off detergent, $1 off coffee. I reused Ziploc bags. I bought generic brands. I drove a 2014 Toyota Corolla with 140,000 miles on it because it was sensible. I had done everything right. I was the responsible one, the ant to the grasshopper. So why was I looking at a financial death sentence in less than 2 years? I looked up from the screen to the wall above the breakfast nook. There was a framed photo from Thanksgiving 5 years ago. My sister Brenda had her arm around me. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of wine in her hand. I was smiling tightly, looking tired. I've always looked at that photo and seen sisterhood. I saw the bond of the only 2 people left from our original family. I saw love. But tonight, in the freezing blue light of the laptop, the shadows on Brenda's face looked different. The way she leaned on me didn't look like affection. It looked like weight. I didn't see a sister. I saw a hemorrhage, and I had been bleeding out for so long I hadn't even noticed I was dying. To understand how I ended up here, awake at 3 a.m. scrutinizing my own ruin, you have to understand the family tax. Nobody talks about the family tax. It's not written in the IRS code. You don't file it in April. But for people like me, the oldest siblings, the steady ones, the ones who didn't drink, didn't gamble, and showed up to work 15 minutes early for 40 years, it is the most expensive tax bracket in the world. My sister Brenda is 2 years younger than me, but she has lived her entire life as a professional miner. She's a victim of circumstance, a victim of bad luck, a victim of misunderstanding landlords and unfair bosses. When we were kids, I did my homework, Brenda lost hers. I saved my allowance, Brenda spent it on candy and then cried until I shared. Our mother, God rest her soul, set the precedent early. Martha, be the big sister. Help her. She's not as strong as you. It was a compliment that became a curse. Strength, I learned, was just the capacity to endure pain without complaining. When I married Frank, the dynamic shifted but didn't break. Frank was a structural engineer. He saw the world in terms of load-bearing walls and stress fractures. He saw Brenda for what she was immediately. The leech, he called her. Don't call her that, I'd snap, usually while writing a check for her emergency dental work or a car repair. Frank, he'd say, his voice rumbling like gravel, she's been going through a hard time since 1978. That's not a hard time, that's a lifestyle. Frank tried to install boundaries. He was the gatekeeper. As long as Frank was alive, Brenda hesitated before asking. She knew she'd have to get past his skepticism. He'd ask for receipts. He'd ask why she needed $500 for utility bill when she just posted photos of a weekend trip to the casino. But Frank died of a massive coronary 6 years ago, and when the coffin lid closed, the gatekeeper was gone. The bad luck accelerated almost immediately. It started with sympathy. Brenda was there for me at the funeral, holding my hand, crying louder than I was. "We have to stick together, Marty," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Us against the world now." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The house was so quiet without Frank. I needed the noise of family. So the wallet opened. It started small, micro-transactions of love. "Marty, honey, Kayla needs textbooks for nursing school. She's going to be a nurse like her Auntie Martha." How could I say no to that? That's legacy. That's pride. I wrote the check for $300. 2 months later, "The transmission on the Honda blew. If I can't get to work, I can't pay you back for the textbooks." Logic, protecting the investment. I wrote another check for $600. Then it became a subscription service. Groceries, cell phone bills, the "I forgot my wallet" lunches, and the "can you spot me until Friday" transfers that never saw Friday return. I told myself I was helping. I told myself I was a good Christian woman. But last night changed everything. I was standing at the sink, washing a Ziploc bag. That's not a metaphor. I was literally washing a disposable plastic bag to reuse it because a box of them costs $4.99 and I'm on a fixed income. The phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Brenda. My stomach tightened. Pavlovian conditioning. After Frank died, a call from Brenda meant never, "How are you?" It meant I need. I dried my hands and answered. "Hello? Martha?" Her voice was high, thin, cracking. The performance. I've heard this tone 1,000 times, but it still triggers a spike of cortisol in my blood. "What's wrong, Brenda?" Oh, God, I don't even know how to tell you. I'm so ashamed." "Just tell me." "It's the house, Martha. They're going to put a lien on it. I missed the property taxes. I thought Kayla paid them, but she didn't, and now the county is sending letters, and they're talking about a sheriff's sale." She broke down into sobbing. I gripped the phone. "How much, Brenda?" $4,000. I froze. $4,000? I have to pay it by Friday, or they take the house. Mom's house, Martha, the house we grew up in. She lives in our childhood home. I signed my half over to her when Mom died because she needed the stability and I had Frank. "Brenda, I don't have $4,000 just sitting around to give you." "Please," she wailed. "I'll pay you back, I promise. I'm getting a settlement from that slip and fall at the grocery store next month. You'll get every penny. But if you don't help, where will we go? Do you want your niece on the street? Do you want me in a shelter?" The guilt washed over me, hot and suffocating. The image of my sister homeless, the shame of it. I have to check my accounts," I stammered. "You have the money, Martha. I know you do. Frank left you comfortable. You have that big house. You go to Florida." "I don't go to Florida. I went to Florida once 3 years ago to visit a dying friend." "We're family," she screamed, sensing my hesitation. "We are blood. Frank is dead, Martha. I'm all you have. Don't you dare turn your back on me." "I'll call you back in the morning," I said, my voice trembling. I hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, shaking. I looked at the drying Ziploc bag. $4,000. That was 6 months of groceries. That was my property tax. That was a new roof if mine failed. But the voice in my head, the voice of the good sister, was already rationalizing it. "It's for the house. She'll pay me back. She mentioned a settlement." I almost wrote the check right then. I reached for my checkbook in the junk drawer. But my hand brushed against something else in the drawer. A calculator. Frank's old solar-powered Canon. I pulled it out. "Frank is dead," she had said. "I'm all you have." "No," I whispered to the empty room. "I have me." I didn't write the check. Instead, at 8 p.m., I made a pot of coffee. I sat down at the computer. I logged into my bank account, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look at the balance. I looked at the history, which brings us back to 3:14 a.m. I had downloaded 5 years of statements, 60 months of data. I had exported them into Excel. I created categories. I color-coded them. Green, fixed costs, mortgage, utilities, insurance. Yellow, living expenses, food, gas, meds. Red, Brenda and Kayla. I was applying the triage principles I used in the ER. You don't treat the patient based on what they say hurts. You look at the vitals. You look at where the blood is coming from. I started tagging the transfers. Venmo, $200. Textbooks, maybe? Zelle, $600. Car repair? Check number 1042, $1,200. Emergency root canal. Cash withdraw, $400. Brenda, groceries. The list went on and on and on. It was a scroll of death. As I categorized the expenses, a coldness started to spread through my chest. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the realization of the scale of the theft. Because that's what this was. It wasn't help. It wasn't charity. I looked at a transfer from 3 years ago. June 12th, $800 sent to Brenda. Memo, fix AC unit. I paused. I remembered that summer. It was a scorcher. Brenda had come over sweating, saying her AC compressor died and she couldn't sleep. I gave her the money. I opened a new tab on my browser and went to Facebook. I have an account solely to see pictures of my grandnieces. I searched for Brenda's profile. I scrolled back through the memes, the political rants, the cat videos. June 14th, 3 years ago, 2 days after I sent the money for the AC. There was a photo. Brenda and Kayla. They weren't in Ohio. They were standing in front of a giant guitar in Nashville, Tennessee. They were wearing matching pink cowboy hats and holding massive cocktails that looked like fish bowls. The caption read, "Girls Trip, Nashville bounded. Hashtag YOLO, living our best life." I stared at the screen. $800. There was no AC repair. I felt a physical, sharp pain in my stomach, like I'd swallowed glass. I checked another date, February 4th, $500. Kayla's unexpected medical bill. Facebook, February 5th. A photo of Kayla showing off a new tattoo on her forearm, a massive, intricate floral sleeve. Caption, "Fresh ink, "Thanks, Mom, for the early birthday present." "Thanks, Mom." Brenda didn't have money for rent, but she had money to give her daughter a tattoo? No, she didn't have money. She had my money. I wasn't an aunt. I wasn't a sister. I was a walking, talking ATM machine, and the PIN code was guilt. I went back to the spreadsheet. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from rage, a cold forensic rage. I looked at the total sum in the red column, the Brenda column. I highlighted the cells, all 5 years of them. I clicked Auto Sum. The number appeared in bold at the bottom of the screen. $42,350. $42,000 in 5 years. That wasn't just money, it was time. It was the trip to Italy I never took. It was the heated seats I didn't get for my car because it was too extravagant. That was the compounding interest I would never earn. I looked at the bankruptcy date again, October 14th, 2027. If I hadn't given them that money, if I had invested it in a standard index fund, I did the math quickly. $42,000 compounding at 7% over 5 years. I wouldn't be going bankrupt in 2027. I would be secure until I was 95. They weren't just taking my money. They were eating my days. They were shortening my life. Frank was right. He had been right every single day. The leech. I closed my eyes. I could hear Frank's voice, clear as a bell in the quiet kitchen. "So, what are you going to do about it, Marty? You going to let them pick the bones clean, or are you going to close the bank?" I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. My pulse had slowed. I picked up the printed stack of bank statements. I could feel the texture of the paper, heavy, sharp-edged. It felt like evidence. I stood up. My knees popped. Arthritis, another thing I needed money to manage, and I walked to the coffee maker. It was 4 a.m. now. The sun would be up in 2 hours. The bank would open at 9. Brenda was expecting a check for $4,000. She was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of her relief, confident that Big Sister Martha would save the day. I poured the water into the reservoir. I scooped the grounds. Dark roast. I needed to be sharp. I wasn't going to give her a check. I was going to give her an invoice. I pressed the brew button. The machine hissed and gurgled, breaking the silence of the house. "Let's see where the rest of the money went," I whispered. I sat back down at the computer. I cracked my knuckles. The audit had just begun. The coffee tasted like battery acid. I drank it black, staring at the steam rising against the blue light of the monitor. It was 4:15 a.m., and the house was so quiet I could hear the hard drive of my laptop spinning, scratching out data like a tiny mechanical claw. I wasn't Martha Evans, retired nurse, anymore. I was a coroner performing an autopsy on my own life. I had the spreadsheet open on the left side of the screen and my digital bank statements on the right. I also had my physical calendar, the one hanging on the kitchen wall where I dutifully noted every family event, every illness, every crisis laid out on the table. I began the cross-reference. In the ER, we look for clusters. If 3 people come in with food poisoning, you ask where they ate lunch. If a patient comes in with bruises on their ulnar bone, you look for defensive wounds. You look for the story the body is trying to tell you. My bank account was covered in bruises. I created 3 columns in Excel: loans, gifts, and emergencies. Then I started typing. August 14th, $300. Kayla, uniform for work. September 1st, $450. Brenda, deductible for windshield. September 20th, $200. Groceries. At first, it looked like chaos, just a scattershot of bad luck and need. But as I scrolled down, entering data from 2022, then 2021, a pattern began to emerge from the noise. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat. The emergencies weren't random. I filtered the Excel sheet by day of the week. My breath hitched. 90% of the requests for urgent cash, car repairs, medical copays, lost wallets came on Friday, specifically Friday afternoons between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Why Friday? If your car breaks down, it happens on a Tuesday. If you get sick, it happens on a Monday. But if you need money for the weekend, if you need to pay a cover charge, if you want to buy a round of drinks to impress your friends, you ask on Friday. I filtered again, this time by date relative to my income. Every single month, without fail, Brenda had a crisis within 48 hours of my pension hitting my account on the 1st. It was clockwork. She knew my payroll schedule better than I did. She wasn't just asking for help, she was harvesting me. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the stale coffee. I had been their payroll department. But the worst part wasn't the timing. It was the math. I looked at the sum again, $42,350.00. That was the principal, the raw cash I had handed over. But Frank used to talk about opportunity cost. Money has babies, Marty, he'd say. If you spend $1 today, you aren't just losing $1, you're losing the $10 that dollar would have become in 20 years. I opened a compound interest calculator in a new tab. I typed in the numbers, principal, $42,350, time period, 5 years, average S&P 500 return, 10%, and then looking forward, if that money had stayed in my account for another 10 years until I was 76. I hit calculate. The number on the screen made my hands go numb. $177,294.18. That wasn't just a new roof. That was my dignity. That was a private room in a care facility with a view of a garden, instead of a bed in a hallway smelling of bleach and neglect. That was the difference between being a grandmother who sends checks and a grandmother who becomes a burden. I had literally set my safety net on fire to keep them warm, and they hadn't even thanked me for the heat. I stood up and paced the kitchen. My linoleum floor was cold against my bare feet. I needed to find something specific. The general pattern was damning, but I needed a smoking gun. I needed to prove to myself, to the naive, soft-hearted Martha inside me who was still making excuses for them, that this was a lie. I went back to the computer. I looked for the biggest single transfer in the last 2 years. There it was, July 12, 2023, transfer $1,200, memo, emergency transmission repair, Honda. I remember that call vividly. Brenda was hysterical. She was stranded on I-77. The transmission had dropped out. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. She said the mechanic needed cash up front or he wouldn't touch it. I had transferred the money instantly, terrified for her safety. I opened the social media tab again. I went to Kayla's Instagram. Kayla is Brenda's daughter, my niece. She's 24, works part-time as a receptionist, and lives effectively on her phone. I scrolled back to July 2023, July 10th, July 11th, July 12th. There were no photos of a tow truck, no sad selfies on the side of the highway. Instead, there was a video. I clicked play. The sound of bass-heavy pop music exploded into my quiet kitchen. The video was geotagged, The Gulch, Nashville, Tennessee. It was a bachelorette party, not Kayla's. She was a bridesmaid. The camera panned around a table at a rooftop bar. There were expensive bottles of vodka with sparklers coming out of them. And there in the center of the frame, wearing a pink sash and holding a massive glass of white wine, was my sister Brenda. Brenda, who was stranded on I-77. Brenda, who was crying on the phone with me at 2:30 p.m. I checked the timestamp on the video, 3:45 p.m. on July 12th. I checked the timestamp on my bank transfer, 2:55 p.m. on July 12th. I had wired the money. 55 minutes later, they were buying bottle service. I froze the video on Brenda's face. She was laughing. It was a wide, open-mouthed laugh, her head thrown back. She looked radiant. She looked carefree. And why wouldn't she be? She didn't have to worry about the bill. Aunt Martha was picking up the tab. I looked at the comments under the video. Brenda Evans, best trip ever. So needed this break. #blessed. Blessed. She felt blessed by my bankruptcy. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a heavy steel door locking into place. For 40 years, I had defined myself as a caretaker. I was the nurse who stayed late. I was the wife who handled the budget. I was the sister who saved the day. I thought my empathy was my superpower. But looking at that frozen image of my sister drinking a cocktail that cost more than my weekly heating bill, I realized my empathy wasn't a superpower. It was a leak, and I was the bucket. Frank's voice came back to me, not angry this time, but sad. They're laughing at you, Marty. You think you're their savior. They think you're their mark. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. The shaking in my hands stopped completely. A cold, clinical calm washed over me. It was the same calm I used to feel when a patient flatlined, the moment where emotions are a liability and only action matters. I closed the browser tab with the video. I opened a new Word document. I typed the header in bold capital letters, Invoice. Underneath, I typed, To Brenda Evans and Kayla Evans, from the estate of Martha Evans, still living. Date, January 30th, 2026. I began to transpose the data from the spreadsheet. I didn't list them as gifts. I listed them as what they were. Loan, 07/12/2023, false pretense, car repair, $1,200.00. Loan, 09/04/2023, unverified medical expense, $450.00. Loan, 11/22/2023, quote, rent assistance, Black Friday, $800.00. I listed every single transaction for the last 36 months. I added a column for interest, calculated at a modest 5%. I worked for 2 hours. The sun began to bleed gray light through the kitchen blinds. The birds started singing, oblivious to the war that was starting in my kitchen. By 6:30 a.m., the document was 5 pages long. The total due was $42,350.00. I walked to my printer in the den. I loaded it with fresh, bright white paper. I hit print. The rhythmic whir, chuck of the printer was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It sounded like a gavel banging on a sound block. I picked up the warm stack of papers. I stapled them in the corner. The sharp crunch of the metal staple felt final. I went back to the kitchen. I picked up my phone. Brenda had texted me at 11:30 p.m. last night, probably drunk, probably panicking. Martha, please, I can't lose the house. I love you. I looked at the text. I love you. The ultimate weapon, the skeleton key she used to unlock my savings account. I typed a reply. My thumbs moved steadily over the glass screen. Good morning, Brenda. I've been thinking about it all night. You're right. We're family. Come over at 10 for tea. I have the check ready. I read it over. It was a lie. A beautiful, tactical lie. If I told her the truth, that the bank was closed, she would ghost me. She would spin a story to the rest of the extended family that I was cruel, that I had abandoned her. She would play the victim, and I would be the villain. No, I needed her in the room. I needed to see her face when the check turned into an invoice. I needed to witness the moment the parasite realized the host was fighting back. I hit send. I put the phone down on the table, right next to the stack of evidence. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the prey. At 9:55 a.m., I placed the envelope on the center of the coffee table. It was a standard white business envelope, the kind I used to mail out utility checks. It sat there, innocuous and flat, looking for all the world like salvation. Inside, however, was not a check for $4,000. Inside was the 5-page invoice stapled in the corner and a glossy 8x10 printout of the Nashville photo. I sat in my armchair, the high-backed one Frank used to claim. I had dressed carefully, not in my usual housecoat, but in a pressed blouse and slacks, wearing my pearl earrings. I wasn't dressing for a family visit. I was dressing for court. At 10:02 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was a frantic staccato rhythm that signaled urgency. Before I could even reach the door, the handle turned. They had a key. Of course they had a key. I had given it to Brenda in case of emergencies 5 years ago. "Martha, oh thank God." Brenda swept into the hallway, bringing a gust of cold January air and the cloying scent of vanilla body spray with her. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was slightly smeared, a calculated touch, I suspected, and her eyes were red-rimmed. Behind her trailed Kayla, wearing pajama pants and a hoodie, her eyes glued to her iPhone. She mumbled a "Hi, Aunt Martha," without looking up. "I didn't sleep a wink," Brenda said, rushing to hug me. Her coat felt damp. "I was so worried. You have no idea what this means to us. You're literally saving our lives." She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes darted instantly to the coffee table, to the envelope. "Come sit," I said. My voice was calm, steady. We moved to the living room. Brenda sat on the edge of the sofa, her knees bouncing nervously. Kayla slumped next to her, thumb scrolling. "I made tea," I said, gesturing to the pot. "Oh, I can't," Brenda said quickly. "I have to get to the bank by 11 to get the cashier's check for the county. If I miss the deadline," she trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air, the imaginary deadline for the imaginary lien. She reached for the envelope. "Is this—" "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." Brenda grabbed it. Her hands were actually trembling. For a second, I felt a phantom twinge of the old guilt. She looked pathetic. But then I remembered the Nashville video. I remembered the transmission repair that never happened. She ripped the flap open. She reached in, expecting the stiff, rectangular feel of a personal check. Instead, she pulled out a folded stack of printer paper. She frowned. "What is this?" "Read it," I said. She unfolded the papers. Her eyes scanned the top page. Invoice to Brenda Evans, amount due $42,350.00. The silence that filled the room was absolute. Even Kayla looked up from her phone. "I don't understand," Brenda said, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Is this a joke? Martha, where's the check?" "There is no check, Brenda." I took a sip of my tea. Earl Grey. It tasted clean. "That is an itemized list of every dollar I have given you over the last 5 years. The car repairs that didn't happen, the medical bills for procedures that never existed, the rent assistance for months when you went shopping." Brenda's face went pale, then blotchy red. "What are you talking about? Car repairs that didn't happen? My transmission fell out on the highway." "Turn to page 5, I said. She flipped the pages, her movements jerky. She froze. There it was, the screenshot of her holding the vodka bottle in Nashville, the timestamp, the matching transfer amount. July 12th. I said. "You called me crying from the side of the road." "But you weren't on the road, Brenda. You were at a rooftop bar in the Gulch. You spent my heating money on Grey Goose." Kayla leaned over to look. Her eyes widened. "Mom, you posted that?" Brenda slapped the papers down on the table. The sorrow vanished. The poor little sister act evaporated like mist. In its place was something sharp, ugly, and cornered. "You've been stalking me?" she hissed. "You're spying on my daughter?" "I'm auditing my accounts," I corrected. "You're confused," Brenda said, her voice rising. She stood up. "You're confusing dates. That was a gift from a friend. I didn't use your money for that. You're getting everything mixed up, Martha." "The dates match, Brenda, to the minute." "You're old," she shouted. "Look at you. You're sitting here making up spreadsheets like some paranoid freak. This is dementia. That's what this is." She turned to Kayla. "I told you, didn't I? I told you Aunt Martha was losing it. She forgets things. She imagines things." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't move. This was the second phase, the gaslight. "I am not confused," I said. "Yes, you are." Brenda stepped closer, looming over my chair. "You forgot that I paid you back for the AC unit. You forgot that the Nashville trip was months later. You're losing your mind, Martha. And honestly, it's scary. You shouldn't be living alone." She looked around the room, her eyes narrowed. "Maybe we need to call a lawyer. If you're spending your nights stalking family members and making up fake invoices, maybe you aren't competent to manage your own finances anymore. Maybe I need power of attorney for your own good." The threat hung there. Power of attorney, the ultimate coup. She wanted to seize the host completely. I looked at Kayla. She was chewing her lip, looking back and forth between us. "Mom, let's just go," Kayla whispered. "No!" Brenda screamed. "She promised me that money. They're going to take the house, Martha. If I lose the house because of your little mental episode, I will never forgive you. Mom would never forgive you." "Mom is dead," I said. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. I am 5'4", but in that moment, I felt like a giant. "And the Bank of Martha," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "is permanently closed." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. "I have been recording this conversation since you walked in." I lied. I hadn't been, but Brenda didn't know technology well enough to call my bluff. "I have the invoices. I have the bank statements. I have the social media timestamps. And now I have you threatening me with a conservatorship to extort money." Brenda took a step back. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "If you ever ask me for a single dollar again," I pointed a shaking finger at the door, "I will send this file to the IRS. I will send it to the county assistance office where you claim benefits, and I will send it to every cousin, aunt, and uncle we have left." "You wouldn't," Brenda whispered. "Try me." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cold air rushed in again, cleansing the house of the vanilla scent. "Get out!" Brenda stared at me. She looked for a crack in the armor. She looked for the sister who had carried her for 40 years. She didn't find her. "You're a selfish, bitter old bitch," Brenda spat as she grabbed her purse. "Frank was right to die just to get away from you." She stormed out. Kayla followed, head down, not making eye contact. "Bye, Aunt Martha." "Goodbye, Kayla," I said softly. I slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain into place. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My legs gave out, and I slid down to the floor. I sat there in the hallway, clutching my chest, gasping for air. It felt like I had just amputated my own limb without anesthesia. The silence returned to the house, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt empty. And then the phone started ringing. It didn't stop with Brenda. The flying monkeys came next. My cousin Jerry called that afternoon. "Martha, Brenda says you kicked her out. She says you're having a breakdown. She's worried sick." Block. My Aunt Linda called. "Family helps family, Martha. You can't take it with you." Block. Brenda sent texts, long, rambling paragraphs oscillating between apologies and vitriol, photos of us as children, threats of lawsuits. Block, block, block. For 3 weeks, my phone was a war zone. I didn't answer. I didn't engage. I followed the advice I gave to patients with gangrene. Cut it off before it reaches the heart. I changed the locks on the house the next day. $150, unnecessary expense. I sat in the silence of my kitchen. It was lonely. God, it was lonely. I missed the noise. I missed the feeling of being needed, even if the need was parasitic. I realized that for years I had purchased their love with checks. Without the money, I was just an old woman in an empty house. But then the first of the month came. My pension deposited, my Social Security deposited, and for the first time in 6 years, the money stayed there. 6 months later, I found myself sitting at a small metal table in the Fiumicino Airport in Rome. The coffee in Italy is different. It's smaller, darker, and it doesn't taste like acid. It tastes like life. I was waiting for my flight back to Ohio. My skin was tanned. My feet hurt from walking the cobblestones of Florence. I opened my banking app on my phone. I hadn't spoken to Brenda in 180 days. I heard through a cousin that she had to sell the house, that she moved into an apartment, that she had to get a job at a Walmart greeting customers. I felt a pang of sadness when I heard that, but I didn't feel guilt. I looked at my balance. The number was green. It was growing. The Brenda tax was gone. I had calculated my new bankruptcy date. It wasn't 2027 anymore. It was never. I took a sip of my espresso. I was selfish. I was alone. I was the villain in Brenda's story. But I was alive. People tell you that family is everything. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, but they forget that blood can also carry disease. Sometimes self-preservation looks like selfishness to people who are used to using you. I put my phone down and looked at the departures board. I was going home to an empty house, but it was my house, and for the first time in 40 years, the door was locked from the inside. You'd think that cutting off my sister was the end of the story. So did I. But when I got back from Italy, I decided to finally clean out Frank's things. I found a key to a safe deposit box I didn't know existed. I went to the bank. I opened the box. It was mostly empty, except for a single manila envelope. Inside, there were photos. Not of me, not of the kids. They were photos of Brenda, taken 30 years ago, and a letter written in Frank's handwriting dated 3 weeks before he died. The first line read, "Martha, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I need to tell you the truth about why Brenda really needs money and who she's really paying. But that is a story for another audit."